This happened 3 years ago when I was 24. I was out in the high desert of Arizona doing contract work for the State Geological Survey, basically driving around to remote locations, taking soil samples and updating old mineral surveys from the 1970s. It was good money for a recent geology grad, and I actually enjoyed the solitude. That particular week in late March, I was working a section about 2 hours northeast of Flagstaff, near some old ranch lands that had been sold to the state decades earlier. The weather was typical for spring in the high desert, blazing hot during the day, down to near freezing at night. I'd set up my base camp near an old windmill and stock tank, one of the few reliable water sources in that stretch of nothing. The plan was simple. Spend 5 days hitting all the survey points on my GPS, camp at night, then drive back to Flagstaff Friday afternoon to drop off samples and resupply. I had my truck, my equipment, enough food and water for a week, and a satellite phone for emergencies. Cell service was non-existent out there, but that was part of the appeal. Just me, the rocks, and the endless sky. The first 2 days went exactly as planned. I'd wake up at sunrise, eat instant oatmeal, then drive out to my survey points. Most were within a few miles of camp, though some required hiking into narrow canyons or up onto the mesas. The landscape was stunning in that stark desert way. Red rock formations, scattered juniper and pinon, the occasional golden eagle circling overhead. I'd gotten into a good rhythm. The first odd thing happened Tuesday evening. I was back at camp cooking dinner on my propane stove when I heard someone call my name, clear as day, from somewhere out in the gathering darkness.
Michael!
Just like that, in my mum's voice. Now, my mum lived in Ohio, and definitely wasn't wandering around the Arizona desert. I figured it was just the wind playing tricks. Desert acoustics are weird. And I'd been alone for a few days, but it was specific enough that I actually checked my satellite phone to make sure I hadn't missed an emergency call. Nothing. Wednesday brought more strangeness. I was taking samples near the base of a mesa, about a mile from camp, when I found fresh footprints in a wash. Bare footprints, human-sized but wrong. The toes were too long, and the gait pattern suggested something moving on all fours as much as walking upright. They followed my tire tracks from that morning for about 50 yards before veering off into the rocks. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone out here walking barefoot. Maybe the wind had distorted older prints. But who walks barefoot in a desert full of cactus and sharp rocks? I finished my work quickly and headed back to camp before sunset. That night, things escalated. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of my truck door opening. I kept the keys in my tent with me, and I knew I'd locked it. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent flap just in time to see the driver's door swing closed. Nobody was visible inside or around the vehicle. When I checked, the door was locked again, just as I'd left it. But my notebook, where I recorded all my survey data, had been moved from the dashboard to the driver's seat, open to that day's entries. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in my tent with my flashlight and the satellite phone, wondering if I should call this in. But what would I say? Someone played with my truck but didn't take anything. As dawn broke, I decided to pack up and leave a day early. I could make up some excuse about equipment problems. I was loading my gear when I heard it again.
Michael!
This time in my dad's voice, coming from up on the mesa. Then, horrifyingly, I heard my own voice respond from the same direction. "Yeah, I'm coming." A conversation between invisible versions of my parents and me, echoing off the canyon walls. That's when I noticed the smell, like wet dog mixed with something rotten, strong enough to make me gag even in the open air. I threw the last of my equipment in the truck and started the engine. As I put it in gear, something slammed into the passenger side, hard enough to rock the vehicle. In the side mirror, I caught a glimpse of what hit me. It looked like a coyote at first, but it was standing upright, using its front legs like arms, its face. The proportions were all wrong, like someone had stretched animal features over a human skull. It opened its mouth and my mother's voice came out.
Michael, where are you going?
I floored it, kicking up a cloud of dust as I tore away from camp. In the rearview mirror, I saw it drop to all fours and give chase, keeping pace with my truck for almost a quarter mile before veering off into the desert. I didn't stop driving until I hit the paved highway, and even then I kept checking the mirrors. I turned in my equipment and samples in Flagstaff, but quit the job that same day. Told them I had a family emergency. I've never told anyone the real reason. I work in an office now, doing data analysis for a mining company. Sometimes I'll get assignments that would require field work, and I always find someone else to go. The weird part, about a year later, I was going through my old field notebook from that trip. On the last page, after my entries, someone had drawn a rough map of the area where I'd been camping. There was an X marked about 2 miles from where I'd set up, with words written in shaky English, "Not for you here." I still have that notebook. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed that last night. Then I remember that thing wearing a coyote skin and speaking with my mother's voice, and I'm grateful I'm a coward. The substitute. You know how every high school has that one teacher everyone whispers about? Ours was Ms. Yazzie, and I need to tell someone about her before I convince myself it didn't happen. She showed up my junior year at Window Rock High School, replacing our regular history teacher who'd had a heart attack. First thing everyone noticed was how she moved, too fluid, like water pretending to walk. She was young, maybe late 20s, with this long black hair she wore in a traditional bun. Dressed normal enough, but something about her face never looked quite right. Like someone had described a beautiful woman to an artist who'd never seen one. The local kids went quiet when she introduced herself. Later, my friend Tommy told me Yazzie was his grandmother's clan name, and his gran had been dead for 5 years. But administration had her credentials. Said she came highly recommended from a school in Shiprock. She knew her stuff too. Could lecture for hours about pre-Columbian history without notes, speaking in this measured, hypnotic voice that made you lean in, even when you weren't interested. But then weird things started happening. First incident was during a lesson on local petroglyphs. She was showing slides of spiral symbols when Marcus, this kid who never paid attention to anything, suddenly stood up and started drawing the same spiral on the whiteboard. His eyes were completely blank. He drew for maybe 30 seconds before snapping out of it, confused why everyone was staring. Ms. Yazzie just smiled and said, "Thank you for demonstrating, Marcus." 2 weeks later, it happened again, this time with 3 students simultaneously. They all stood up during her lecture on migration patterns and began walking in a circle around the classroom, chanting something in an old language that none of them actually spoke. When they woke up, they had no memory of it. The other teachers started noticing, but Principal Begay seemed weirdly protective of Ms. Yazzie, said kids were just acting out for attention. The thing that made me realize she wasn't normal happened in late October. I'd stayed after school for basketball practice and realized I'd left my phone in her classroom. The hallways were empty, that eerie, quiet schools get after hours. Her door was cracked open, and I could hear her talking to someone. I peered through the gap and nearly screamed. Ms. Yazzie was standing in front of the whiteboard, but her shadow was wrong. It had 4 legs and a tail, and she wasn't talking to anyone. She was practicing being human.
Good morning, class.
She'd say, then adjust her face slightly,
Good morning, class.
each time with tiny modifications to her expression, her posture, the tilt of her head, like someone rehearsing for a play about humans. Then she must have sensed me because her head snapped toward the door, 180 degrees without her body moving. I ran, grabbed my stuff from the gym, and got my mum to pick me up, claiming I felt sick. The next day in class, she kept watching me. Not obviously, but I could feel it. And when she handed back our essays, mine had a note, "See me after class." I didn't go. Started skipping her class entirely, taking the absences. My friend Sarah thought I was being paranoid until the day Ms. Yazzie brought in a guest speaker. Except the guest speaker looked exactly like our old history teacher, the one who'd had the heart attack. Same clothes he used to wear, same coffee-stained tie, same everything. Except his movements were wrong in that same fluid way. And when he smiled, Sarah said she saw too many teeth. Way too many. The class ended with half the students in some kind of trance, drawing spirals in their notebooks. Sarah and I walked out. We weren't the only ones. About 6 of us just quietly gathered our things and left. Tommy was one of them. He looked at me and said, "My grandmother warned me about skinwalkers who try to gather people. They're not hunting, they're collecting." That night Tommy's family did something. I don't know what, but it involved smoke and singing that went on until dawn. The next morning, Ms. Yazzie wasn't at school. Principal Begay announced she'd had a family emergency and wouldn't be returning. They brought in a different substitute, normal and boring and human. But here's what still messes with me. About a month later, I saw her at the mall in Gallup. She was working at a clothing store. Same fluid movements, same not quite right face. She saw me see her and smiled. Then she said, in perfect imitation of my voice, "Hey Mum, can we go?" My mum, who was beside me, didn't even notice. But I dragged her out of there so fast. I graduated and left for college in Albuquerque, far enough away to feel safe. But sometimes I search online for new teachers at reservation schools, looking for her picture under different names. Tommy says she's still out there, still collecting, still practicing being human in empty classrooms. He also says the students she put in trances sometimes dream the same dreams, about running on 4 legs through the desert, about wearing faces that don't belong to them, about a spiral that goes down and down and down, with something ancient and hungry waiting at the bottom. I never remembered my dreams before her class. Now I remember them all, and sometimes they're not mine. The night shift. I'd been living in the double wide for 3 months when things started getting weird. The property was a work perk, free housing in exchange for being the overnight security guard at the solar farm just outside Holbrook, Arizona. 20 acres of panels in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nothing but sagebrush and red dirt for miles. The nearest neighbor was a rancher family about 2 miles east, and town was a 40-minute drive. Perfect for someone who'd just gotten out of a bad marriage and needed space to think. My routine was simple. Wake up around 7 p.m., make dinner, feed Diesel, my 3-year-old German Shepherd, then head to the solar farm by 10 p.m. for my 12-hour shift. The job itself was mind-numbing. Drive the perimeter every 2 hours, check the equipment sheds, make sure no one was stealing copper wire. Mostly, I sat in the guard shack, reading or watching Netflix on my phone. Diesel came with me most nights, good company and an extra set of eyes. The trailer sat on a flat piece of land with decent views of the San Francisco peaks in the distance. Previous guard had left it pretty clean, even built a nice covered porch where I'd sit mornings with my coffee, watching the sunrise paint the mountains pink. There was a chicken wire fence around the immediate property, maybe an acre total, just enough to mark the boundary and keep Diesel from wandering too far when I let him out. First sign something was off came on a Tuesday in early November. I'd just gotten home from my shift, about 10:30 a.m., sun already warming up the desert. Diesel was acting strange, wouldn't get out of the truck, just sat there whining and staring at the trailer. I figured maybe a coyote had been sniffing around. I checked the property, didn't see anything unusual. Finally had to physically lift all 80 pounds of him out of the truck. He stayed glued to my leg as we went inside. That night, around 2 a.m. at the solar farm, I got a call on the guard shack phone. Nobody ever called that phone. Most people didn't even know the number. I picked up, heard static, then my ex-wife's voice clear as day.
Baby, I'm sorry. Come home.
The line went dead. Here's the thing. Lisa had been dead for 2 years. Car accident in Phoenix. That's what ended our marriage. Me not handling her death well, drinking too much, losing my job. Except apparently my grief-broken brain had gotten some wires crossed because there was her voice on a phone that maybe 5 people knew the number to. I told myself it was a prank, someone who sounded like her. But Diesel had heard it too. Hackles raised, growling at the phone even after I'd hung up. 2 nights later, things escalated. I was doing my 4 a.m. perimeter check when my headlights caught movement by the equipment shed. A woman in a white dress, long black hair, standing perfectly still beside the building. My heart hammered. Lisa had been buried in a white dress, but when I stopped the truck and hit the spotlight, nothing. Just my own reflection in the shed's window. Diesel went absolutely ballistic, barking and snarling at something I couldn't see. I've never seen him act that aggressive. I finished the check fast and spent the rest of my shift locked in the shack with all the lights on. When I got home that morning, I found footprints in the dirt around my trailer. Bare feet, walking the entire perimeter of the fence line. The stride was wrong, too long, like someone taking deliberately huge steps. In one spot, it looked like whoever it was had stood at my bedroom window for a while. The curtains I always kept closed had been pulled back about 6 inches. That's when I remembered something the rancher's wife had told me when I'd introduced myself months earlier. The old woman, she'd looked at me real serious and said, "Don't whistle at night. Don't answer voices that sound familiar. If your dog won't go somewhere, you don't go either." I'd smiled and nodded, figured it was just local superstition. Now I was starting to think she'd been trying to warn me. I called in sick that night, first time since starting the job. Spent the evening securing the trailer, new locks, motion lights, even some cheap security cameras from Walmart. Diesel wouldn't leave my side, kept positioning himself between me and the windows. Around midnight, the motion lights started going off, one by one, like something was circling the property, just outside their range. Then came the knock at the door. 3 measured raps. When I looked through the peephole, Lisa stood on my porch. Not something that looked like Lisa. It was her. Same crooked smile. Same way of tucking her hair behind her ear. She was even wearing the Soundgarden t-shirt she'd stolen from me years ago.
Baby, let me in. I'm so cold.
Diesel went from growling to screaming. A sound I didn't know dogs could make. That's when I noticed her feet. They were wrong, bent at an impossible angle, more like a dog's hind legs forced into a standing position. And her eyes, they reflected the porch light like an animal's. I grabbed Diesel's collar and backed away from the door. "You're not Lisa." The thing wearing her face tilted its head, smiled wider. Then it spoke in my voice. "You're not Lisa." Perfect mimicry, even down to my panicked tone. It laughed, a sound like coyotes yipping, and I heard it walking around the trailer, still on two legs but with that wrong animal gait. I spent that night in my truck with Diesel, parked at a well-lit gas station in town. Called my boss the next morning, quit on the spot. Didn't even go back for my stuff, just drove straight to my sister's place in Colorado. She mailed me my things a few weeks later. Said when she'd gone to get them, the old woman from down the road was there, burning sage around the property. Told my sister that something had been walking with the wrong skin, and it was good I'd left. Said folks around here had been dealing with it for generations, keeping it contained to the empty places. But sometimes it fixated on newcomers, especially ones carrying grief. I work construction now, strictly day shift. Live in a second-floor apartment in the middle of Denver, as far from empty desert as I can get. Diesel's still with me, still sleeps pressed against my legs every night. Sometimes he'll suddenly stare at the window and growl, and I'll remember that thing's perfect mimicry of Lisa's voice. I don't talk about it much, but when people ask why I left Arizona so suddenly, why I won't take jobs in rural areas, I just tell them I'm a city person now. It's easier than explaining that something out there in the desert learned to wear my dead wife's face, and the only reason I'm alive is because my dog knew the difference. The hunt. This happened last October when I was 26. I'd drawn an elk tag for Unit 7 east of Flagstaff, and my brother-in-law Rick had offered to come along even though he didn't hunt. He knew the area from his Forest Service days and figured I could use a spotter. Plus, Marissa worried less when I wasn't out there alone. We set up camp Thursday afternoon in a spot Rick knew, about 8 miles down a forest road near Mormon Lake. Perfect elk country, mix of ponderosa pine and open meadows, fresh sign everywhere. The plan was simple. Scout Thursday evening and Friday, hunt Saturday through Monday, pack out Tuesday morning. Rick had brought his good binoculars and would help glass the meadows while I tried to call bulls in. The weather was ideal for elk. Crisp mornings in the low 30s, warming to maybe 60 by afternoon. That first evening, we hiked to a ridge overlooking a series of parks and immediately spotted a herd of cows with a decent 5x5 bull. They were about a mile off, feeding their way toward the dark timber. I was pumped. Rick marked the spot on his GPS, and we planned to be there before dawn. Friday morning came, with a light frost and dead calm conditions. We were in position by 5:30, watching the meadow emerge from darkness. No elk. We spent the day exploring other areas, finding rubs and wallows, learning the terrain. Rick showed me some pictographs on a cliff face, spirals and animal figures that he said were pretty common in the area. That evening, we saw the herd again. Different meadow, but same general area. The bull was bugling, and I practiced my calls, getting a few half-hearted responses. Everything felt right. Good sign, good weather, elk talking. Rick made his famous camp chili while I organized my gear for the morning hunt. We turned in early, exhausted but optimistic. I woke up at 2 a.m. to absolute silence. Not normal forest quiet, complete absence of sound. No wind, no small animals rustling, nothing. Then I realized what had woken me. Something was breathing outside the tent. Deep, rhythmic breathing. But the rhythm was wrong. Too long between inhales, like something was smelling rather than just breathing. I elbowed Rick awake, put my finger to my lips. We lay there listening as whatever it was circled the tent slowly. Once, twice. On the third pass, it brushed against the rainfly, and I got a whiff of something rank, like wet dog mixed with spoiled meat. Then footsteps, walking away, but wrong. The pattern was off, like someone taking 2 steps with their left foot, for everyone with their right. Neither of us slept the rest of the night. At first light, we found tracks around the tent. They started as boot prints, transitioned to bare human feet, then to something else entirely. The final prints near the fire pit looked like coyote tracks, but were the size of my spread hand. Rick stared at those prints for a long time, finally said, "We should go." But I'd driven 6 hours and waited 5 years for this tag. I convinced him to give it one more day, promised we'd hunt close to camp. Looking back, I should have listened. Saturday morning, we set up on a small ridge, maybe a half-mile from camp. Good vantage point, escape routes in every direction. The woods were still too quiet, but I figured whatever had visited our camp had moved on. I started calling just after dawn, soft cow calls to start, building to challenge bugles. 20 minutes in, I got an answer, but it was wrong. It started as a perfect elk bugle, then morphed into something else, like someone learning the sound in real time. Each call getting more accurate, but also more human. Rick grabbed my arm, shaking his head. The calling was getting closer, fast. Too fast for an elk picking its way through the timber. I stopped calling, but it didn't matter. Whatever was coming had locked onto us. It emerged from the trees 60 yards below us. From a distance, in the low morning light, it looked like a bull elk. Trophy bull. Massive 6x6 rack. But it was standing upright on its hind legs, walking like a man. Its front legs hung at its sides like arms, and its face, the proportions were all wrong. Eyes too far forward, mouth too wide. Rick and I froze. The thing stopped, tilted its head and called again. This time it was my exact call, note for note. Then it spoke, in Rick's voice. "That's a nice bull. Take the shot." I couldn't move. The rifle felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The thing took a step closer, still on 2 legs, and its antlers shifted. They weren't antlers. They were branches, twisted and woven into something that looked like antlers from a distance. "Take the shot," it said again, this time in my voice. Rick broke first, grabbed my pack and shoved me. "Run, now!" We ran, crashed through the timber like spooked deer, branches tearing at our clothes. Behind us, that thing bugled, a sound that started as elk and ended as human laughter. When I glanced back, it was following on all 4s, moving through the trees like smoke. We hit the camp at a dead sprint. Rick had his keys out, throwing gear in the truck bed. I dove into the passenger seat as he fired up the engine. In the mirrors, I saw it standing at the edge of camp, upright again. As we tore down the forest road, it raised one of those wrong front legs and waved, a perfectly human gesture. We didn't stop until we hit pavement, didn't talk until we reached Flagstaff. At a gas station, Rick finally spoke. My grandmother was Hopi. She told me stories about things that hunt the hunters, skinwalkers that take the shape of what men desire most, then take the men themselves. I turned in my tag unused, told everyone I got sick, had to leave early. Rick and I never talked about it again, but I know he thinks about it. Last week, Marissa mentioned he won't go camping anymore, makes excuses when his Forest Service buddies invite him out. I still hunt, but only day trips now, only in groups, never in Unit 7. Sometimes, when I'm glassing a meadow and see movement in the timber, my hands start shaking, because I know that somewhere out there, something learned my voice, learned my call, and one day someone else is going to answer it. The detour. My sister Elena and I were driving back to Phoenix after our grandfather's funeral in Farmington. It was just the two of us in her beat-up Honda, trying to make the 6-hour drive in one shot because neither of us could afford a hotel. This was back in February 2019, middle of the week. Hardly any traffic on the 191 cutting through the reservation. Elena had been living in Phoenix for 3 years, working as a nurse at Banner Health. I was finishing my senior year at ASU, studying mechanical engineering. We weren't particularly close. 10-year age gap will do that. But family is family, and Grandpa had raised us both after our parents died. The funeral had been rough. Lots of relatives we hadn't seen in years. Lots of questions about when we were moving back home. The usual guilt trips about abandoning our culture. We left Farmington around 4 p.m. Figured we'd be home by 10. Elena drove first while I navigated, though it's pretty much a straight shot south. Weather was clear but cold. That high desert winter where the sun feels warm but the air bites. We stopped in Ganado for gas and switched drivers. That's when things started going sideways. About 30 miles south of Ganado, we hit a roadblock. 2 tribal police cars, lights flashing, officer directing traffic off onto a dirt road. He said there'd been a serious accident ahead. Hazmat spill. Highway would be closed for hours. The detour would add maybe 40 minutes, but would get us around it. He seemed legit. Uniform, badge, the works. Even gave us a hand-drawn map showing how the dirt road connected back to the highway near Chambers. The detour started fine. Decent gravel road, recently graded. Eleanor was nervous about her car handling it, but I'd driven worse in my friend's truck. We passed a few other cars heading the same way, which made us feel better. But after about 20 minutes, the road forked. No signs, no indication which way to go. The map showed a fork, with an arrow pointing left, so we went left. That's when we stopped seeing other cars. The road got progressively worse. Gravel turned to dirt. Dirt turned to barely there tracks through the sage. Elena kept asking if we should turn back, but I was stubborn, kept saying we had to be close to reconnecting with the highway. The sun was setting, painting everything in that golden light that makes the desert look like Mars. Beautiful, but also made it harder to see the road. Then we saw the woman. She was standing right in the middle of the track, facing away from us. Long grey hair, traditional velvet skirt and blouse. Eleanor slammed the brakes, honking. The woman didn't move. We sat there for maybe 10 seconds before she finally turned around. Her face was my grandmother's. My grandmother, who'd been dead for 15 years. Elena made this choking sound. I couldn't speak. The woman, the thing wearing my grandmother's face, smiled and beckoned us to follow, then walked off the road into the desert. Not walked, glided, like her feet weren't quite touching the ground. That's not her, Elena whispered. That's not fucking her, Miguel. I knew that, but part of me wanted to follow anyway. That's the thing about seeing someone you loved and lost. Even when you know it's impossible, the heart overrides the brain. Elena threw the car in reverse, but the engine died, just cut out completely. She tried the ignition. Nothing. No click, no turnover. The radio was dead too. Our phones had lost signal miles back, but now they wouldn't even turn on. The not grandmother appeared at Elena's window, tapped on the glass with fingernails that were too long, too sharp. When she spoke, it was Grandma's voice exactly. "Mija, why are you driving around out here? Come, I'll show you the way home." Elena was crying, pressing herself against me. I reached past her and locked the doors, like that would matter. The thing circled the car, running those wrong fingernails along the metal. The sound was horrible, like claws on a chalkboard, but deeper, vibrating through the frame. Then there were more of them. Shapes approaching from the desert, some walking upright, some on all fours. In the dying light, I caught glimpses. A man in an old military uniform, a child in a school dress, a woman in modern clothes, all with that same gliding movement, all with faces that probably meant something to someone. One looked like our dad. Eleanor lost it then, started screaming, pounding on the horn even though it wouldn't work. I grabbed her, held her, tried to think. The shapes were getting closer, surrounding the car. Some were starting to change, features shifting like smoke. The one that looked like Dad dropped to all fours, body elongating in ways that hurt to watch. That's when I remembered something our actual grandmother used to say. If you're lost in the desert and see familiar faces, close your eyes and think of water. They fear the sacred. I fumbled for the water bottle in the cup holder. Just a half-empty Dasani, nothing sacred about it. But I opened it, splashed some on the windshield, and started praying. Not in English or Spanish, but in the broken words our grandparents had taught us, words I hadn't used in years. The things outside recoiled. Not much, but enough. The engine turned over. "Drive," I told Elena. "Don't look at them, just drive." She gunned it, tearing through the circle of shapes. In the side mirror, I saw them give chase. Some running upright, some on all fours, all moving faster than anything should. But we had wheels and desperation. And after the longest 10 minutes of my life, we burst onto an actual paved road. The highway. Somehow, we'd circled back to the 191, about 50 miles from where we'd started. There was no evidence of any accident, any hazmat spill, no roadblock. It was like we'd imagined the whole detour. We drove straight through to Phoenix, stopping only once for gas in Flagstaff. Under the fluorescent lights of the station, Eleanor looked at me and said, "Those weren't cops at the roadblock, were they?" I shook my head. We never talked about it again, but we also never drove through the res separately after that. Last month, Eleanor called me out of the blue, said she'd been having dreams about Grandma beckoning her into the desert. Said sometimes, in the dreams, she follows. I've been having them too. Sometimes I wake up in my apartment in Tempe and find red dirt on my feet, even though I haven't been home in months. Sometimes I hear fingernails on glass when I'm alone in my car. The detour is still out there waiting, and part of me knows that eventually we'll take it again. Only this time, we might not make it back to the highway.